So we're going to get to some full commentary on the Bank of Canada's interest rate hike, as well as some commentary. We're filming this show a little bit later today because I begrudgingly made these guys. I told them that I had to get through the whole presser of listening to Tiff Macklem, so that took some time. That guy is extremely boring, but we'll get into that again in a little bit here. And then we want to touch on some of this commodity boom that we've got going on. Obviously, that's going to play into some of the inflation moving forward, and then sort of an update on Russia, Ukraine here. So that's kind of the docket for today's show. But yeah, I guess first and foremost, let's lead it off with your first rate hike since 2018. So 25 basis points. I think it was baked in the cake. I had people even though texting me the day before being like, it's not going to happen, Russia, Ukraine. Like, the guy had to move. There's political pressure, I think more importantly on central bankers, that they have to do something and they have to at least act and pretend to be tough on inflation. And so there really wasn't a choice, which we'll get into moving forward, of how many more rate hikes we're going to get into. And then we had Tiff Macklem's commentary following up today. So they hiked rates yesterday with no real announcement, and they followed up today with a little bit more context on that announcement, which we'll get into. But I guess your initial reaction, Keith.
To what?
He's sleeping. Sorry, guys. He just woke up from his nap.
So, I love these events, and I forget what word you used to describe. What did you describe Tiff as a couple minutes ago? What was
I said he's boring as hell. I said I miss Pelosi and his metaphors that he had.
Yeah. So I like all these guys for what they are. It is what it is with these guys. So a couple things about today's presser. It wasn't really a presser, by the way, and it is very different. If you're listening to it from what I say, you're going to say, oh yeah, that's right, it was different. So for the Bank of Canada normal meetings they have a presser afterwards, which is hosted by the Bank of Canada. But the people invited to ask questions at the Q&A is the mainstream media guys, so Bloomberg, CTV, CBC, and guys like that. From my perspective, those there are a lot of beach ball type questions. They're not really representative of what investors and managers or the everyday person is thinking about. You always watch those pressers, I do anyway, to see what he says, right? Because they don't really, and if you watch any of the Parliament Q&A sessions or anything, the politicians, they never answer the question they're asked. They just say what they want to say, right? So it's kind of funny. So that's what you watch from the normal pressers with the Bank of Canada. Today's presentation was hosted by the CFA Society in Toronto. And the Q&A was really good. There were some thoughtful questions in there. A lot of them were sort of overlap with what you'd get from a regular Bank of Canada presser, but these were really good. So if you have a chance, go back and watch the recording on it. It'll be on the Bank of Canada website. But overall, the theme, and again, if you listen to what the Bank of Canada is saying, when they explain what's causing inflation in the Canadian economy, they're touching on everything. They're very accurate with that, and that's great. You can't poke any holes in it. The one thing they do leave out, though, they never say that they caused the housing inflation bubble that's taken place. They made no contribution to that at all, and that's just wrong. You have to own up and say, you know what, we may have contributed to it, but they're hands off that. But they talk about supply chain disruptions, people working from home. Today he had a good conversation that, the goods prices. So people were buying computers, gyms for their homes and stuff because of the lockdowns, and they were spending less on services, going out to eat and things like that. And all that is correct. However, they're also very adamant that the response to control inflation is going to be them raising rates. So on the one hand, he said the reason inflation has gone skyrocketing is because of the shutdowns and people can't, commodity prices have gone up and all that stuff. And of course, Russia was the first thing he mentioned, what's causing inflation, which only started 2 weeks ago. So that's a bit hard to reconcile. But again, the takeaway from it is one thing for us to joke and say, they don't know what they're doing and all that stuff. They do. But the takeaway message is they're going to raise rates, and they are going to continue to do it until they're not able to anymore. That was very strong today, the message was. And he even said, hey, they wouldn't be afraid of raising rates at by 50 basis points during a meeting. So I thought today's meeting was actually a lot more hawkish than what I was expecting. And but overall, I do encourage people to watch it. It was pretty good.
Yeah, before we jump to Rich's commentary here, I just on the housing front, you talk about central bankers never taking the blame. It's funny because they've actually come out, a lot of them, not just the Canadian central bank, but the Aussie central bank and the New Zealand central bank, and their defense is basically that they view housing inflation as a fiscal problem. They view it as a fiscal responsibility on the federal government level. So that's kind of the craziness of it. But Rich, I don't know what your thoughts are here.
Well, just to address what you just said, I think they're sort of right, aren't they? Fiscal is in like it's a government legislative problem, like Canada allowing too many people into this country, or trickiness with red tape and zoning and stuff like that. I mean, to some degree, I would argue that the Australians probably have it right. To say that the central bankers have nothing to do it is absurd. I don't know if I was taking Tiff Macklin, I wouldn't want to tell everybody I was doing a shit job in a press release or in a presentation. So I can understand him sort of skirting that answer. As far as to be honest with you boys, I did not watch the presentation. I knew the two of you guys would do it. I've watched so many of these, whether it was Mario Draghi or Ben Bernanke or Jerome Powell. My point is, I think you're right. I think they had no choice. I think they had to do it. I think what's interesting from Keith's comment is, I think something that we should, I think it's going to flow into sort of my broader macro picture when we get into it, which is to say, although the invasion of Ukraine is sort of top of the mind and top of the headlines, it's kind of screwed up to, we're going to get into this later. It's kind of screwed up to admit it. It just doesn't have that. I don't think it doesn't really have that much impact on the global economy in the medium term. And I think that that's what these guys are sort of trying to address, which with, I think, the more hawkish comments. I mean, that's sort of my view. I don't have anything more to add.
I was just going to say that Tiff Macklin is just, man, he is so boring. I think he's like the guy when all like the boys get together for a beer, and he's the guy that orders the soda water. I don't trust the guy that orders the soda water.
Yeah, no. But he's supposed to be boring though, isn't he?
I don't know, man. But I think Pelosi would slam beers.
Well,
that guy looks like a bro.
What is it? Abraham Lincoln, a man with no vice has little virtue.
Pelosi is like the guy that comes to like your beer league hockey game with a 48 pack and crushes 12 of them after the game in the parking lot. But yeah, I don't know. In all seriousness, yeah, I think watching the presser, basically the takeaway that I got was that he was quite hawkish. More hawkish than I was anticipating. I thought that he might use more of the Russia-Ukraine as more air cover to not raise. But I mean, the one thing they did say was, they'll continue to kind of monitor inflation. They'll monitor its impact on the housing market. I think the one thing that he said, which I tend to disagree with, which was that our economy can withstand higher interest rates. And I think, okay, we can withstand 50 to 75 basis points, maybe 100 basis points, but I still think that I think everybody's wildly over optimistic in terms of, basically, I think we're a housing economy, and I don't think our housing market can withstand mortgage rates north of 3.5%. So that's kind of the key number that I'm looking at. Now, keep in mind, when I say this to people, I'm assuming that with rates at 3.5%, inflation is within its range today. I mean, if inflation's at 8 and mortgage rates are at 3, then I mean, it's probably still fairly bullish for the housing market.
Already on.
Yeah, I don't know. I mean, what else can I say on that? I mean, I'm kind of curious your guys' thoughts. Do you guys have any updated views on projection for end of this year? I mean, I know we've all been somewhat on the same page of 2, 3, maybe 4 rate hikes this year. Do we get next announcements in April, right, Keith? Is that do you think we're getting another 25 basis points in April, or does he pause and wait for the next meeting?
Yeah. So first of all, you made first. You should also explain. Maybe some listeners are not familiar when we say the word hawkish or dovish. Maybe explain what that is. But before you do that, you actually, when I was listening to you, I'm thinking, oh yeah, like you just hit on the most important message that came out of the Bank of Canada's meeting today. Was that he said, hey, the Canadian economy has enough slack; it can absorb higher rates, and I don't think it can. That's my own view. So there is a bit of a collision coming up here, and we'll sort of weave into that as we go along here, because there's a lot of forces coming into play. But again, that is one of the key, because it gives us the message that they're going to raise rates. They're going to keep raising rates now until they're not able to anymore. And usually the moment they stop, it's always a little bit too late. It's after the accident has started.
Well, yeah, no, I was just making the joke on Twitter the other day because I was like, this is pre-Bank of Canada rate hike. And I was like, these guys are literally starting their rate hiking cycle as the housing market is actually turning. I can say that with pretty full confidence right now as someone that works on the ground day to day and chatting with everybody in the industry. Like, things are changing.
When you say turning, do you mean the month-on-month rate of change is negative? Do you mean it's just that second derivative has slowed, or do you mean the year-on-year prices are now, the year-on-year price change is now negative? Is that what you mean? No.
Yeah, that's a good question. So everyone's like, well, is that going to show up in the data? Like, this isn't going to show up in the data for a couple months, but like, I think what you're starting to see is like housing activity is beginning to slow. It's coming off of like all-time like record hot frothiness, fever pitch. And so what I mean by that is like, okay, you can see it. This is happening in Vancouver. This is happening in Toronto. Where basically, houses that were typically getting like 10 offers on a house, like you're seeing a lot of houses now only get one offer, two offers. Sometimes on offer date, you're not getting any offers. You're like, well, that's strange. Like, had that house been listed for sale 3 weeks ago, they would have gotten 8 offers and now they're getting 0. So like, you're starting to see that shift. I would say that's kind of what I'm saying. So it's like, are prices falling? No. I mean, is it still extremely hot market? Yes, but it's starting to change and we're just beginning our rate hiking cycle. So I find it like the timing is always ironic because, I mean, I think there's a strong argument to be made that it takes some time for monetary policy to filter through into the market. Should they be a little bit more proactive and say, hey, housing's starting to get really out of control. Maybe we should do a quick 25 basis points here to slow things moving forward. It's like they kind of wait. They just wait. They waited for so long. And I think they're behind the curve. And now they're tightening. In my opinion, they're going to be tightening into a slowdown.
So I agree with you. Obviously, they're behind the curve. One thing I forgot to mention in my comments earlier, which is real interest rates are still minus like 3.5%. So even 25 basis points today is still, frankly, it's a drop in the bucket. Yeah. But I would say, just to be the one mini counterpoint is like, the front end of the yield curve. So the 2-year bond yield has done a lot of the heavy lifting for the central banks. So, it's not the central bank's job is to regulate banks. Obviously, it's also to message and do some kind of forward guidance. But I also think it's the signaling, which we got 6 months ago, you could argue kind of worked. Right? Because they said, okay, we're going to raise rate. I mean, I can't remember when they said it over the summer. They said, Q1 of next year, we're going to raise rates, whatever. It doesn't matter. My point is that precipitated, I mean, the US did it also. So it's not just Canada, but that precipitated the rise in the short-term bond yield, which in effect is a kind of rate hike from the central bank. Do you get what I mean?
Well, yeah, no, 100%. I think like it is all like forward guidance, right? So it's basically forward guidance
together.
Forward guidance again for those that might not understand that. It's basically just like them alluding to something. It's them forecasting. Basically, they're trying to change your behavior, your habits, and so you'll remember precisely at the start of the pandemic, Tiff Macklem came out and was like very adamant. We're going to leave rates at 0 for a very long time. well into 2023. And that was like the green light. I remember saying that's the green light to speculate in housing. So everyone's like, oh my God, mortgage rates are 1.3%. This guy's going to leave them there for the next 3 years. Let's go load up. That's what they did. Now you're seeing, like, I see it with clients all the time. Hey, rates are going up, aren't they? Well, maybe we should wait. Maybe the housing market's going to start to slow down. So it's like just them like talking about rate hikes starts to change consumer behavior or market sentiment.
Can I ask one more question? Sorry, on the housing. I'm just really curious. So I know you said that sort of the volumes and transactions are slowing down, and sort of the froth is maybe, it's coming off the boil a bit. Are you seeing more inventory? So, or are people, there was like, oh, we're not going to sell because of COVID. We don't know, blah, blah, blah. But are you seeing that? Are you seeing the inventory numbers change or not at all?
Not really, slightly, okay. But like what I will preface is that we're actually entering into the busiest time of the year for the housing market in terms of, so March, April, May.
Housing very seasonal.
Very seasonal. So March, okay. April, May, every single year, March, April, May, that's where you get the most number of new listings. Everybody lists their house for sale March, April, May. I don't know why. It's just what it is. So my thought process is like, okay, the housing market is clearly starting to slow down. We're now going to be entering a period where seasonally we get a lot of new listing activity. Is the buyer demand going to be there to meet that listing inventory? And my suspicion is, yes, it will probably still be a balance to seller's market here in the spring. But I mean, it's definitely changing from all-time frothiness. The only other thing I'll just touch on here and get Keith, maybe your comments to summarize on this. But so people were asking about, we talked about this on the show before, but so keep in mind, right? So the Bank of Canada raised variable rates, they raised the overnight rate by 25 basis points. Obviously that changes the bank's prime rate, which is tied into your variable rate mortgage. And so just for everybody's context, because everybody goes, oh my gosh, there's going to be this huge calamity. So your variable rate mortgage yesterday went up 25 basis points. That equates to, so every $100,000 that someone has borrowed on a mortgage, that equates to roughly $12 increase on a monthly basis. So your payment went up by $12 to $13 per month based on how much you borrowed. And then just to quantify that one more time is not only about half of variable rate mortgages actually have floating payments. So half of variable rate mortgages have fixed payment structures. So even if the Bank of Canada raises 100 basis points, your mortgage payment will stay the same. The only thing that will change is how much of your payment goes towards your principal pay down. So people just think, Bank of Canada raises its rate 6 times this year. That's going to equate to, the average mortgage going up $300-$400 a month. Nobody can afford it. Everything's going to blow up. No, keep in mind, a lot of the big banks, their product has a fixed variable rate payment, which takes a lot of that risk out of that market. So that's something I'd sort of preface. Keith, I don't know if you have any commentary on any of that, but.
No, but you did ask me just a few minutes ago about what are the rate expectations coming up. So the next meeting is on April 13th, and the percentage of a rate hike is 188%. Right. So basically what that means is that a 50 basis, so the probability, there's a high probability that the Bank of Canada will increase rates by 0.5% at the next meeting.
Half. So 50 basis points.
Well, it's not 100% guaranteed, but the market is leaning towards that right away. So 25 basis points is in the bag. If they don't do that, it's, they're going to shock the world again. But the market right now, they're saying, you know what, there is a chance that they do 50 basis points as well. So, maybe, where is it?
Who wants?
Yeah.
Oh,
the Twinkie box is coming up here.
Okay. Do we have a Twinkie bet here? Does anybody have 50 basis points in April? I'm going with no.
I'm going with yeah. I mean, now I do like Twinkies, mind you. So
this show is as boring as Tiff Macklem. Holy smokes!
I think we're pretty cool guys, actually. So we're not boring.
Are we gonna go?
So
Are we going?
let me just go through.
Are we going around the horn? Are we going around the horn here? Who's got? I'll go 25 basis points in April.
Oh, me?
Yeah.
Oh no, I don't think they'll raise rates. No, I think they'll do 4 times this year. So this is the first, and then because I think the reason I think, and it actually is a good segue. Keith, you're up next, but this is a good segue because I think the Russia thing is going to get worse before it gets better, and then they're going to get scared off their path. So I'll take the under. I'll take a 0 for next meeting.
Oh man, Rich is going to start eating my Twinkies. I love Twinkies.
So much confidence in the old boomer, eh? So much confidence.
I know. But you made a good point, though. So if there was none of this, this crisis and war taking place, again, 25 basis points are in the bag. That's going to happen. And I do think they would love to do 50. I don't know if they would. I would actually put money on 25 basis points. But it comes back to your comment, Rich. Like if you feel that, the situation over in Ukraine and elsewhere, it could spread. If it's going to get worse, then, that absolutely puts a 0 rate hike in play. So my suggestion to you, Rich, is don't get excited about the Twinkie. You need to look at the Canadian Bankers Acceptance Contract, my friend.